Hello and welcome to our Women in Technology series. This is our fifth webcast in the series. We've had an outstanding engagement and feedback from our previous ones. I have no doubt, that today with our exceptional panel and super interesting topic, we'll carry on that trend. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for the panel to be with me today. I am Carole Gentil. I'm the banking technology leader at EY, and I've worked for more than 20 years in financial services and technology. To set the scene, and then I will introduce our panel. Our topic today is how we can navigate through challenging times and still be successful. It's a topic that I'm sure many of you are thinking of on a daily basis, I will, talk with you and the panel about, the real experiences of women in tech. We are going to touch upon the balance, that we all try to achieve between career, family, health expectations, the management expectations as well, and how we manage these expectations from families, from boards, and how we can overcome personal difficulties and still remain at the top and carry on with having successful careers. So before I introduce the panel, a little bit about myself and my personal experience. I'm the mother of three daughters, actually, from 8 to 18 years old. I've spent 20 years in financial services, as I said. I ran my career across 2 countries, came in the UK at the time of financial crisis, which was a challenge in itself. And I've had lots of challenges throughout, and I will speak, with our panel members about these. Society, is demanding to women. I think that's a fact. We are at the crossover, between generations as well. Work is demanding, at times where, career, at critical times in our career journeys, and I think that's specifically impactful for women and needs to be dealt with. How I've done it and I do it. Look, I think for me it's about focusing on what matters and make it work. I never wanted to choose between the different facets of who I am. And I find it fulfilling, to be a woman, to be a mother, to be a wife, to be a friend, to be a daughter, to be a professional. And I never wanted to give up on any of that because I enjoy each of them. And I think the thing, I had to accept and deal with is to be imperfect. And what I would say is I encourage, all of you to accept to be imperfect, because that's one way, to balance it all. And as you're imperfect, you also need to acknowledge, the extent of your success. I think, women work in many areas of life, equally successful in each of them, and you need to take the time to recognize that. So that being said, let me introduce our panelists and take a few moments to meet these impressive women. I'll start with Anne Sheehan. Welcome, Anne. And you're the general manager for Microsoft Ireland. You're responsible for sales, marketing, and the service businesses. You focus on delivering business transformation. Previously, you were an enterprise director at Vodafone UK, and you worked with IBM for 16 years across several senior positions. You're passionate about developing partnerships to work towards an innovative and progressive digital world. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I move to Bhavna Buttan. You're joining us from our MENA region. Welcome, Bhavna. You have 20 years of experience in retail. You've created value-driven operating models through sustainable transformation. And your purpose is to transform the gender narrative to foster equality. And you believe that economic independence for women is a lever for success. You were previously CEO at GMG, and you're about to start a consulting firm in the gender equity and transformation space. So very topical. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Helen Price, welcome. You have an active role as sponsor of women in technology and technology area careers at Fidelity. You're head of technology for the Chief People Office, Chief Finance Office, and General Counsel. You joined Fidelity in 2015 as a program director in multi-asset technology. And previously, you worked for Goldman Sachs Asset Management as a senior engineer running the global fundamental equity technology team. Welcome, Helen. Very nice to have you today.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
And Lisa Gibbard, an inspiration, and you will hear more from Lisa during our webcast. Lisa joined the Thomas Miller Group as Group CIO in April 21. She has 25 years of board and business expertise of building and leading global IT and ops in financial services organizations. And she spent the last 24 years building her career in insurance, working with Aon and Aspen. And recently, she acted as interim CIO for MS Amlin. And she's also a trustee of the Not Forgotten charity, and she sits on a technology advisory board. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us.
Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. So we are going to run that discussion in two parts that will be followed by Q&A. So please, feel free to share your questions as we get along that discussion. The first part, of our panel will be around personal experiences and insights, and the second part will be more, about what can drive positive change. In order to support women to succeed in technology, especially at critical points of their career. So let's start with you, Anne. You have personally been in the fast lane for some time now. Could you share with us how you've been able to keep the energy levels up and to continue to remain at the top, whilst balancing different expectations from your family and boards?
Okay, thank you, Carole, and good afternoon to everybody. Delighted to be part of such a esteemed panel. I've kind of got five, in the interest of time, kind of 5 key points to make around that, but it all centers around managing your energy. And the first thing for me is I always have to have a real passion for what I do. So I made a move to Microsoft to run the site in Ireland, which is nearly 5,000 people, over a year ago. And the reason that I moved is the mission statement for Microsoft is to help every person and organization on the planet achieve more. And I just thought, how incredible is that? So every morning I get up and I motivate myself by saying, you know what, we can really use technology for good change and digital transformation. So that's the first. The second is being curious. So I'm really, really curious as a leader. I love hanging out with people that know more than I do. Doesn't matter what layer they are in the organization. And then again, that gives me huge energy and really helps me be engaged and motivated for everything that I do, right? The third, I guess, is back to me to be kind of personal. So my motto is, come as you are, do as you love. So I think, so my personality, and for anybody out there that knows me, I'm very energetic, very passionate. And I think, throughout various stages of my career, particularly in my very, very early career, managers and bosses would say to me, Anne, you're great, the output is great, but could you just be a little bit like everybody else? And actually trying to be somebody you're not is simply exhausting, right? It really, and I would try for a few days, and then the old Anne would come back again. So I think, in terms of managing, and being at whatever position you're in an organization and trying to manage family, employees, work, whatever the case may be, if you're not your true authentic self, if you're not doing something you love, then a huge amount of your energy gets wasted and goes into things that just don't motivate you. And I think that becomes the start of, struggling to try and manage between work, life, and all the demands that are on. So I think, managing yourself is just super important. I think the fourth point is you've got to surround yourself by people that are just better than yourself. So I think the trick to anybody that's in management on this call, or a team leader or in leadership, is you've got to find the best people. And when you find the best people, you've got to empower them. And by empowering them and unleashing the best in what they can do, then again, it helps you as a leader to kind of prioritize and make sure that you're not doing everything and that you can create time for, you know, your family, your friends, whatever the case may be. And I think that's really, really important, right? So make sure that you're spending a huge amount of your time on your people, finding great people, empowering people, developing them, encouraging them to be curious and encouraging them to be themselves. And I think the last is, you know, if you can get that balance right, so you're doing something you love, you're doing something that's, you know, for me, it's about technology for good. You're developing people. You are your true authentic self, which is good, bad, and the ugly that comes with like bringing your whole self to work. Then I think you'll create the space for time outside of work. And there's different things I do to recharge, you know, outside of work, and that's really, really important to me. But you've got to create the space and the time. So I think, in summary, I would say how you manage your energy, and if you don't manage your energy into things that motivate you and that really help you, then I think it's very hard to get that work-life balance correct or in the right place.
Thank you very much, Anne. Super inspiring and a lot of energy from your response. So I think we can all learn from it. But moving to Bhavna. Good afternoon, Bhavna. Again, we've heard some interesting points already. I would like to move on an example of a particular instance where you felt that your personal situation was impacting your work, and how did you manage this?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity again for being here, and really, really enjoyed everything you said. I love the authentic and the passion piece. I think that's so important to bring into work every day and everything else. So in my experience, the best lessons have always been through the theory of elimination, not so much the theory of choice. So the situation that I'm going to talk about today is probably best exemplifies in equal measure what one should not do, and hopefully from that derive what one should do. So this was back in 2017, and I had already held quite a few commercial roles within the organization, and was now had recently been promoted to about a year ago to the general manager of the sports division, which was essentially a fixer-upper. And in this part of the world, and actually in most parts of the world, retail in a commercial role within an entrepreneurial or a growth mindset company essentially meant incredibly long hours. What was happening in my life at that point is I was also getting divorced. I was going through a divorce at that point in time, which essentially meant that I was going to become a single income family. And at the same time, I was going to become the primary caregiver for my two daughters. So my needs had changed, which is in both in terms of financials as well as, most importantly, time. And something obviously needed to change for me to be able to deal on both those fronts. We tend to have a lot of internal narratives that essentially lead to a lot of assumptions that we make, and I made them too. I essentially made two assumptions, the first of which was because the role that I was doing was like an overhaul of the entire operations of that division, it meant that we actually missed the revenue numbers that particular year. And because I was the head of the division, numbers were my responsibility, my sole accountability. So because I didn't meet the numbers, I couldn't ask for a raise, irrespective of pay parity, because there was a pay gap between what I was being paid and my male colleagues for the same role. So the internal narrative is I didn't deliver that year, and therefore I can't ask for anything. And the second was moving to a more established organization would afford me both time as well as the pay. Again, the internal narrative there was the changes in my life. It's not the organization's responsibility or problem. And the value was not in the 8 years of delivered numbers that I had already done, but more about changing the environment, because that was an easier thing for me to do. So instead of addressing the change of circumstances with my boss and negotiating based on the proven track record, which also had given me 2 promotions within that organization, I found another job that fit the criterion, and I resigned. That action of that resignation essentially led to 3 outcomes. One outcome was there was a salary correction, not only one that matched the offer that was made by the other company, but exceeded by 15%. The second was I was given a flexible day off to work from home, and this is obviously pre-COVID, way before COVID, so to work from home, which wasn't a company policy, and an exception was made for me. And I was promoted to vice president of, and a new department was generated for me, which was basically to develop homegrown retail formats for the organization. Of course, I stayed, and I'm really glad I did, because what that resulted in was it laid the groundwork for me to eventually become the CEO of the group. So the summarized lessons for me from that, or what I learned from that, was number one, know the value that you generate for an organization and your value within the industry, and preferably know that numerically. Number two would be know what outcomes you want from a certain discussion or changes in, don't let the current frameworks of an organization restrict that discussion, and probably negotiate what it is that you want based on what would be a win-win for both. And there's always white spaces within every single organization that are available for people to claim. And most often the value that you generate or the skill set that you have are fungible and can be repurposed within that same organization.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your openness, and it seems that led to great outcomes and value, as you said, which is very positive. Moving to Helen now. Maybe Helen, you can take us on your career journey, and Bhavna just spoke about balancing. How did you find the right balance at critical points in your career?
Yes, hello, and hopefully I will build a little bit upon some of the points that have already been raised. So when I started my career, I was very focused on my career. It was kind of my life. I threw myself into it with all of my energy, and I loved it, right? Learning new things, the curious piece, sort of absorbing all of that information. And it was a fantastic time, really enjoyed it. And I was driving my career forward. And then I had a baby. And before I went out on maternity leave, I was incredibly naive. I thought I would take my maternity leave, I would come back, and it'd be exactly the same. I'd be able to create that energy and do the same amount of work. And it was so naive of me to think that at the time. And then about halfway through my maternity leave, I had one of these connections with my manager coming back. And the conversation I started with her was, I don't know if I can come back, right? It had changed so much, sort of struggling, being a mother, realizing that's a big commitment and that's a new part of who I am. And I wanted to keep that. So we had a really open conversation about career, about options, etc. And we agreed I would come back on a 3-day week. And it was a really conscious decision on both sides. So I knew it was an experiment. I wasn't sure if I could balance being a mum and a career at the same time, certainly a career that I would want, because I was quite ambitious. And she was very clear that actually a 3-day week was going to be a struggle from my side. I wasn't going to be able to drive my career as fast as I had been, and it might be a bit of a holding pattern. So we had a really open, conscious conversation about the pros and cons, and we decided this was the right way to go. So I came back, and it was a holding pattern for my career for a year, but it was what I needed because it kept me in the industry, it kept me working at a rate that I could manage, and then I went out on maternity leave for a second time. And then midway through that maternity leave, I came back, had a very different conversation with my manager, which was, right, I'm definitely not having any more children. I know that. Love them, but I'm not having more. But I now know how to balance this better. I've sort of worked through some of those difficult points. So I want to come back. I want to drive my career this time. So, I'm asking you, I want that career back. I want some opportunities. But it's a 4-day week, right? But I will make this work, right? Because I've had some of that experience. And she was fantastic. She looked around the organization. She found a new role for me. So just after I came back, she went, right, there's this opportunity. It will be a great, sort of acceleration for your career. But it was quite scary. It was in trading tech. It was when I moved into trading tech. I was like, I've heard traders are difficult. Am I really prepared to do this sort of coming back after maternity leave? But again, I made a very conscious decision. I thought really hard about it. It's like, is this the right time to take on that challenge? Can I jump in with both feet? Do I have a support network at home to help me? And I decided, yes, this is the point. I can do it, right? So I did. I jumped in with both feet. And actually, it turned out to be a great career move. It drove a huge amount of progression for me. I made it work on the 4-day week with a lot of help from people around me. But I think the important thing is that there's been several points in my career where I've either stepped up, stepped back, stepped sideways, but always really consciously doing it because I wanted to create that balance between personal and work and my ambitions. And consciously deciding when was the right time for me to decelerate and accelerate.
Thank you very much. I like the expression jumped in both feet, and also, I think that's also why I spoke about the journey and the career journey. I don't believe that women in particular have linear career journeys, and I think that's exactly what you've described, and taking conscious decisions around it is probably a good way to get that balance. Thank you very much. Moving to Lisa now. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us again. How have you managed to get that right balance throughout your career when you manage, career journey, family commitment, and personal health, please?
So I wish I'd have known Helen before I took my decisions, because they weren't all conscious decisions, I'll be honest. So, as like Helen, I started out, it was all about my career, working long hours, 7 days a week. It meant everything to me. Usually work became before friends and family. And it also certainly came before myself and my health. And really, I didn't really recognize that at first until I started to get to the senior levels of an organization and started to think about having a family as well. And I remember having a conversation with a female leader in the industry who said, you can have it all. So I went in slightly, let's just say I hadn't considered what the impact would be. So I had children. I came back up very quickly, 4 months after the first child, 3 months after the second child. And I looked to build my career and continue to build my career. I was at an exco level. I had a clear line of sight of where my next career move was. And that was very much my focus. And I would say, even after having my children, my work was still my first priority. I hate to admit now on reflection. I traveled a lot. I was very fortunate in many respects. I had a live-in nanny Monday to Friday. So I felt I had the best of both worlds. Didn't have to worry about the kids Monday to Friday because she took care of them and I could focus on my work, and then I had the pleasures at the weekend. It was also a bad thing because it allowed me to kind of, abuse my responsibilities as a mother and not get home in time for things, etc. Because I was like, well, they're well, they'll be looked after, they're fine. And actually, I even convinced myself they're probably better off with a nanny because she's probably much better at looking after them than I am myself. So did a lot of that. And then when I turned 40, I found a lump and realized I had breast cancer. So I was very lucky. We worked very, very good. And I went through, I had a mastectomy, reconstruction surgery, and went straight back to work. Now, I'd been told your health has to come first. You have to get that balance. I said, yep, not a problem. Probably 3 months back, I took a promotion. I took on more responsibility. After that, probably a year later to the day when I diagnosed with cancer the first time, I got cancer a second time. So this time, chemo, radio. I think I was out of the office for about 4 to 6 months again. And I went back, took on more responsibility. And my husband saying to me, you are mad. What are you doing? And I went, oh, it's about my career. I've always wanted to get to this point. And he was like, you've got to get the balance right. Listen to your consultants. I was like, yeah, I'm fine. I can do everything. And then it took one weekend. There I was at home, and my son asked me to do something with him. And I said, do you know what? I'm too tired. Mummy's too tired. And he said, well, but that's your problem, Mum. You're always too tired. And I thought, oh my God, you're right. That's all I ever say. All I ever talk about is being exhausted. So I went into my boss, and I was very lucky at the time, the CEO. And I said to him, look, something's got to give. It's either my family, my career, or my health. And I said, at the moment, there's only one thing that's the obvious answer. And he said, look, Lisa, he said, obviously we don't want to lose you, but your health is by far the most important thing, particularly what you've been through. He said, why don't you take a sabbatical, take 3 months off, regroup, have some rest, have some downtime, and see what it is you really want. He said, I'll support you on any decision that you make, but make sure it's the right decision for you. So I took the 3 months, and by the end of it, I thought, actually, it's the right thing for me to step back from my career. So I took a really conscious decision. That's probably the first conscious decision I did take in my career path, to say, actually, yes, this is right. So I took 18 months out. I did struggle even coming out of the workplace. I really got frustrated by some of the school gate politics as I got more involved in the school, etc., and tried to control and own and manage everything that went on at schools. But I decided then, look, I'm going to come back into the workplace. I want to work, but I need to do it on my terms. So I started to interim. And I think that really comes back to what Helen talked about and Anne talked about in terms of making sure it was right for me. What was it that was going to fulfill me, but allow me to meet all my other commitments as well? So I started to interims in a couple of organizations. I've gone back into the CIO role, and I very much look at how do I contribute to organizations and add value. And if I feel that I've done what I can in an organization, I'm happy to move on as well. So really now it's about getting the right role and getting all of those balances, and making sure that I focus on all three things: my family, my health, and my job as well. So that was certainly my experience going through my career.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing. Listening to all of you, there is always something to learn every time someone is sharing their personal experience. So thank you for that. We are going to move to the second part of our discussion to focus on what can drive positive change in order to support women succeed in technology, especially at critical points of their career. So, we are going maybe to hear more tips and insights from each of you, certainly. Bhavna, do you want to share with us how you've changed your home and family arrangements to improve work-life balance on top of your work arrangements?
As soon as I can go off mute, absolutely. Sorry, Lisa, I every time I hear you speak, and last time as well, it just, congratulations, you're such a fighter, you're such an inspiration, and I hope we all grow up to be like you. In terms of, as I said earlier, for me, the wake-up call was to, when I became a single parent, was to obviously reassess everything. And I think what Anne and Helen said is you don't want to compromise on any of the roles. So it's like saying you have to kind of bunker down and turn around and look at all of your roles that you do in your life and basically turn around and think of it almost like a project, right? So what I essentially do is, and I don't want to give up any of the ambitions or the aspirations around any one of those roles, not being a mother, not being a taking care of the home or taking care of the family, or also being, senior leadership in an organization. So you have to get down to resource availability, both in terms of time and the things that you have to do against it. So what I started to do when I got divorced, which was the first time I did it was when I was 40, is I would I would do basically an intensive strat planning week, right? So I would turn around and sit on a beach with a cocktail, and I would plan essentially every single role in my life. Now, again, you don't have to do it on a beach in a cocktail, but it massively helps. I would take the role of work, and I would turn around and put in time to turn around and look at the strategic planning across all of the aspects of management, whether it was organizational, whether it was a technical roadmap, whether it was commercial roadmap, and most importantly, also to look at the team and the human capital that I had and what their development needs really were and what the assessments were and what they needed to do better. In terms of kids, I would turn around and take the entire school calendar, events, whether it's Halloween, International School Day, costumes, whatever is required, and I would put that down in an Excel as well. I would take extracurricular activities, whatever they've done last year, how can I up the game for them, what are they interested in doing? I would research all of them, and I would put that into the Excel as well. And of course, I'm putting time slots for each one of these in terms of when they need to happen and when they need to happen by. Immunizations, vaccinations, health checks for them, family holidays, where we were going to go, all of that for the kids was done in an Excel. I also turn around and do things like the annual food plan. I go into hyper recipe research. I make an entire exhaustive list of everything that the kids would want to eat for the whole year, which then translates to being able to do the menu in like less than 20 minutes every Sunday morning, and the grocery shopping immediately after that online. I would do the financial budgeting for the house and the family. I even have a home cleaning schedule for the month, which has gone up on the refrigerator, so the helper knows exactly what to do every single day. Home maintenance contracts, pest control, everything was done essentially in that week. The other roles of things like family and social engagements that gets put in as well. I have in my schedule when I'm going to call my mother every week, when I'm going to see my brother and my sister-in-law for a drink, what are the friends that I'm going to see, when I'm going to see them, and it goes in, including Bollywood dancing nights that I absolutely love. And last but not least would be the most important role, which was me, right? As a friend of mine says, that you've got to follow the rule of the oxygen mask in an airplane. You've got to take care of yourself first before you're able to do anything for anybody else. So what my health really looked like, what are the checks that I needed to get done, including mental health checks, what are the courses I wanted to do, what are the books I wanted to read for that particular year. I love gardening and I love poetry, so I make sure I schedule in 2 hours a week for both of those things. And, that's my meditation every morning, is watering the plants, for example, and I make sure I do that every morning. And also writing down goals for myself. So I remember with the first holiday I took is when I had written down that I'd like to make C-suite by the time I'm 45. And because I wrote it down and because I planned it, I actually achieved that goal at 43. So essentially, the lowest common denominator for that is I schedule everything. Now, what that essentially does is, what it allows me to do is that one intensive planning week takes away all of the anxiety of having to use brain space on tactical daily tasks. And it allows me to focus on what I'd like to do. And most importantly, make space for contingencies, because you're able to then deal with things like, a child falling sick, which is not per plan. And the biggest advantage of this for me is also the ability, when you're looking at something in an Excel, you by default end up in a prioritization zone. And it's amazing how much you can cull out because of prioritization. So whether it's people from your life that you don't necessarily want to, they don't make the cut because there is no time. And they're not really adding very much value, or the people that you want to make an effort with in terms of a social calendar. Or what are the things, there are going to be unmanageable number of projects and balls, et cetera, up in the air. So what are the ones that are going to get dropped? What are the ones that you need to garner support from? So I moved homes, for example, close to my brother and my sister-in-law that live a street away, to make sure that there was somebody that I had the community and the family close enough if I needed any kind of support. Right? So those are the kind of changes I've made. It then kind of helps me get peace of mind. So that 1 week of intensive planning gives me peace of mind for the rest of the 51 weeks in the year, right? I think the point I'd love to make here is, in my experience, the binary approach that we normally have to like professional versus personal, and we keep complying to those personas, saying from 9 to 5, I'm an assertive professional. I have to display leadership skills. I have to have great planning skills, and I can be kind and empathetic and normal for the rest of the roles or the rest of the time. And what that ends up doing, and I think Jerry Colonna says it incredibly well, is it is in our compliance that we are complicit to the conditions that don't really serve us. So we're doing ourselves a lot of misfavors when we kind of restrict those two binary approaches to things. I think the positive side is that women already do more than four or more roles in their lives. That means they're already multitasking super people. I think the World Economic Forum's gender gap statistic says that at the very minimum, it is 2.5 times the number of hours that unpaid labor or home care labor is done by women over men. So theoretically speaking, you already have the skills to be able to multitask. You're already doing that. And I don't like the word multitask, but do multiple different roles. The advantage of the non-binary approach for me is that the skills are fungible, right? So if I use critical thinking from work and my planning skills from work to have cleaning schedules up on the refrigerator for cleaning, and down to a T, I make sure every single corner and every single switch in the house is cleaned as per what I'd like for it to be cleaned. I'm also making sure the nutrition for my kids is right. I grew up in India, and the way we express love and take care of our children is to cook for them, which I still manage to do every day because it is planned a year in advance, and I know exactly what I'm going to cook, and it takes me 30 minutes to do it on a Sunday. And I use all of the other feminine traits of, being a mother at home and being a friend, and I'm able to bring those into being an empathetic leader at work for my team. So I think the mental fatigue that comes from having to take care of the daily tasks is far more harmful than the actual tactical aspects of it, and it kind of messes with your confidence at some point, and then drastic steps are sometimes taken, which kind of unfortunately lead to the workforce participation stats that we see globally today. So schedule everything.
Thank you very much. Trying to get off mute too. Very impressive organizational skills. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of us will find it helpful. Just reminding you, please post in your questions in the Q&A so that we can come back to you on these afterwards. Moving now to Anne. Do you think, Anne, that people talk enough about their personal challenges at work and how to navigate these? We've heard a lot of openness from the panel about that, and if not, why do you think it's not happening, and what can be done to change this individually, and what organizations can do as well? Because we've spoken a lot about what we do as women to manage things, but let's talk a bit about what organizations can help with as well.
Yeah. First of all, I'm going to come live in Bhavna's house I think she's based in Dubai, because I think you're the most organized person ever. So that was just inspirational. I've just learned a lot. So I think when we look about openness and topics, particularly in relation to females in the workplace, I think it starts with the culture of the organization. And that's interesting because, in a lot of different businesses that I've run, a lot of people will say to me, they look at the top for the culture. At the end of the day, we're all the culture of our organization. So we look at the values of the companies we work for, but it takes all of us individually to be leaders. And it doesn't matter whether you manage 1,000 people, 100 people, one person. We all have to step in to create a culture, to manage a culture, and to drive a culture. So, for example, maybe to kind of bring it personally to something that I'm doing at the moment, which is around the fearless organization. So it's about creating an open space platform for everybody just to communicate and to bring themselves to work. So, for example, on every Monday morning, I do a check-in with my team. And we spend 5-10 minutes each we do kind of like a weather forecast. So on Monday, to be open with everybody, I said, look, I feel like I'm in a tropical storm at the moment. I've got this going on, that going on, this going on at home. And it's incredible when you get that openness, to get emotional connection amongst teams, and teams that are emotionally connected perform better. Well, you have to create the platform for openness. So my advice would be, don't wait for somebody else to do it. Like, why don't you or we be the leaders that will just say, do you know what? I'm going to bring my whole self to work. I'm going to talk about something personal that's going on in my life, or I'm going to talk about a worry I have with the business I'm running or a customer. So for me, I think trying to enable that fearless organization where people can, say what's on their mind, not feel threatened, not feel they're weaker if they do it. And if you're the leader of an organization, you have to lean in and help solve the problem, be a really active listener. I've had to work for years and years about being a really attentive listener, because sometimes when you've got huge energy, all you want to do is cut across the person and solve their problem. But actually active listening really creates a great forum. Now, I think there's been a huge amount of progress made. And, what I've been so thankful for is subjects like menopause, which was never spoken about up till probably the last year or two. And now we're seeing more and more organizations talk about, women that are going through the menopause, which, as I said, was never discussed before, which can be a really challenging time, is now being spoken about. And if it's not in your organization, please try and encourage it. Also paternity leave. So, any of you that have kids or, a partner or whatever, the fact that they can also get time to play their roles. So I think we're in a bit of a better place, but it takes a lot of hard work. as I said, it takes, each one of us to be leaders, to create that open platform. Like, nothing is great than dialogue. Put the problem in the middle of the center of the table and get really good active debates and discussions going on around it, and be a role model. But it does start with the culture, and all of us lean into the culture. And I think for me as the leader, I talk very openly about how I manage myself, how I manage my time, the techniques I use to manage stress. So I'm very open. I was with 1,000 people earlier in the week in Microsoft, and I spoke about like breathing techniques that I use when I feel like I'm a bit stressed. I just try and calm myself down. How I manage my leisure time, how I manage technology. So the worst thing is I wake up at 5 a.m. every morning, and the last thing you want to do is stick that phone to your face. So how I manage that, and by being open, I think that creates a platform, hopefully, to help others. So I hope, Carole, that's useful to anybody that's listening.
I have no doubt it is. Thank you very much. Lisa, one question for you. What can organizations do better, or what can they do to better support women in technology whilst juggling home life? And it's something important as well, besides what we do to make it work, what organizations can do more to help women in technology work and juggle that.
And I think the first and foremost thing has to be organizations have to move to focusing on outcomes. It's not about presenteeism. It's not about, who's talking to who, when. It's really about, is the individual doing the job that they need to do? So I think if we can move away from presenteeism in particular, that would certainly help. But, to measure outcomes means you have to manage. And not everybody likes managing, or not everyone's good at managing, or it's easier just to, make sure people are in the office and be seen to be working. So, it takes a lot of energy and effort, but it's about focusing on those outcomes. I think it's the first thing. I think the second thing is there's been a lot of good work done, and we've talked a lot about returning to work post-family, post having children. There's much more around shared parental leave, etc. So some really good things about returning to work have started to be addressed. But I think, for working mothers, your challenges are different depending on the age of your children. In the early years, it brings, challenges returning to the work, that emotional connection with the children, the guilt that comes with it. But, as children go through their stages of life, as they attend and start to approach GCSEs, etc., the needs are different. But the needs of the parents are just as, they're different, but they're still there. So again, it's about, what can we do also to support, women and men in the workplace who've got different varying age of children. I don't think we've done enough yet in terms of later stages of children's lives when, there is just as much support required. And I've heard so many stories about people, particularly women, leaving their jobs because they feel they can't cope as their children get to that teenage years to balance both work and life. But I think the other thing is we shouldn't lose sight of this isn't just about children, right? As you get to different stages of your life, different, activities come as well. I've got an 87-year-old mother, for example. I've got older, parents, in-laws, etc. And people who don't have children, for example, they still have those types of challenges. So I think as organizations, we need to learn, we need to adapt, and we need to support our people, because if we've got happy people who can work, who can balance work life, you're going to get so much more out of them from a workplace. You're going to get commitment from them. The more organizations give to people, the more people give to organizations in many respects. So I think it's really important about how do we focus on the outcomes and the needs of the organization, but making sure we balance the needs of individuals as well.
Okay, thank you. I think the point on outcomes, personally, I found it very interesting during COVID times, because I thought, COVID forced organizations and managers to look at outcomes. And it was quite revealing, looking, at teams and how it worked and the outcomes during that COVID period, based on outcomes becoming, more important for everybody. I thought it changed, some of the games sometimes in organizations. So thank you for sharing that. Moving to our last question, and we'll get into Q&A again, and that's something I saw in the questions as well. What organizations can do and what allies can do more broadly on the topic of women in tech? And maybe Helen, you want to take that one? Well, I think Helen has an issue with the technology, which of course was going to happen with women in technology. So we can come back onto that during the Q&A. So we are done now, with our questions. I'll come back to Helen when she's back online. Maybe we can.
I just made it back. I'm sorry.
Excellent. Please go ahead.
So sorry. So this is a question around the organisations, correct? Just to make sure I'm in the right place.
Yes, and allies, and what allies can do more broadly on the topic of women in tech.
So there's two things I'd want to stress, and actually one of them has come up, and one of them is about flexibility. So to me, the really important thing here is that flexibility is not something that women need. It's something we all need. So at different stages in our career, at different stages in our life, we might need to work part-time. We might need to take leave for various different reasons. And as that normalizes across men and women, it becomes less of a women thing, right? It becomes less of a break in that mid-career point for many women. And I've seen that, like our Fidelity offers, I think it's 26 weeks of fully paid parental leave for men, right? And actually loads of men are beginning to take that up, right? So now that changes that environment in which you see women go out and you don't see men go out. Actually, we now see both go out. So that normalizes it for both sexes. I have men in my team who work 3-day week, 4-day weeks, right? And the more men who take advantage of those options and show that it is normal for everybody to want to balance work and life for a variety of different reasons, the more that also helps the women, because it doesn't become a women thing anymore. So I think that's one thing that we all need to help push within our organizations, that actually, if you're a man listening to this, have you ever thought about working flexibly? It's not just an option for working mothers. This is actually an option for everybody. So I think that's one thing we can really do to help everyone balance work life. The second thing is around allyship. So I don't think most firms do enough to help people understand what being a good ally is, right? And we can all be allies, and we all should be allies, right? Not just for women, but for every form of diversity that exists, right? There are often situations we are in where we have an advantage, right? We're more senior. We know the people in the room. We've more experience in this area. What can you do in those situations to give some of that advantage to somebody else? To bring them into the conversation, to introduce them to the right person? How can we, an expression I heard recently was, how can you loan people your privilege, right? And to me, that's part of being a great ally, is actually helping others by giving some of the advantage that you have from the position you've reached in an organization to others. Help them out. Because allyship is not about turning up to an event. It's not about wearing a badge. It's about how you turn up to work every day and how you make that difference every day. So I think it's really important that companies help to educate people about what being a great ally means.
Thank you very much. It's super important, and we've talked a lot about people around us and around women, and I think socially and how we organize, and also at work, it's super important. As someone once told me, it needs a village to bring children, and I think some of that is true. And we need more allies to make it work. So thank you for that. Question, for Lisa from the chat. What would be your advice to a first-time expecting mother going through a difficult pregnancy, and how would you advise to manage expectations at work and not come across like she doesn't, or she's not trying to work hard enough?
So from my perspective, and I talk from personal experience, having had a difficult pregnancy as well, first and foremost, it's about you. It's about your health and the health of your child. So do not be worrying about work would be my first point, is make sure you put yourself first. And this is key. And I know that's easier said than done, and it may make you feel uncomfortable. But, at the end of the day, work is just work. and you've got to enjoy your pregnancy and make sure you're comfortable and you're doing all the right things for you and your child soon to be born. So I would definitely say that is the first thing. I think the second thing is have the honest conversation. Most of this, people probably are absolutely understandable of your current circumstances and your situation, but it's you, in some respects, your inner self saying to me, oh my God, are people judging me? Are they thinking I'm not pulling my weight? And I think you've just got to accept where you are, have the conversation, say how you feel, talk about how you feel. And if you don't feel you can talk to your manager, maybe talk to somebody else in the organization and share some of your concerns and what you're doing. Talk about what you need to be supported in order for you to do your job. But I would definitely start with yourself first. And, the job is secondary in circumstances like that.
Thank you very much. Another question now, from someone who's moved, companies to take on a CEO role, and having, most of her direct reports, middle-aged white men, and as there is a build of a new team and transforming the culture, how can how to attract and retain female technology leaders, and what advice would you give to do so? Maybe Anne, you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, so whoever wrote the question, thank you first of all for the question and the fact that you're looking to change. 70% white male is just never going to be representative of society or representative of your customer base. So kudos for starting. So I would think, look, first of all, it's about always on hiring. Actually trying to find great females. Often they're more conservative. You have to dig deeper to find them. They're less likely to move, so you have to spend more time with them. So the first thing I would say, I know you're probably trying to recruit now for roles, but you should be constantly, and your leadership team need to be constantly in the market, meeting, having coffees with females, right? Even if you don't have roles available. So I have this view with my leadership team, we do always on recruiting. And actually, every 2 weeks, we take an hour out of our diaries and we spend time talking about who in the market do we think is out there? Should we go and have a coffee even if we don't have roles? And we do a particular focus on females. So that's the first. You need to work really, really hard and be recruiting even when you don't have roles. The second is look at your job specs. We did a huge amount of work in Microsoft over the last 3 years on particular how you write the job spec, and it has opened up a whole new world. So I don't have time to go into it now, but there are particular words actually when females look at something. One example is super. If you put we're looking for super talented, females hate that word. So there are certain words in job specs that just turn females off. So look at that. And I would say, look into, there is always hidden females in your organization. Maybe take some risks. There might be somebody that's, on that kind of 3 to 5 years away, but have a look on the female side, because maybe they're the ones that, just you need to take a risk on. So, well done for looking at it, but I would say always on hiring, and you got to figure out, hang out where the females hang out. So go to the industry forums, you'll find them. We're out there, just need to find us.
Thank you very much. And yes, sometimes it takes a bit of effort, but I hope you all hear it's worth it. So maybe our last question, ladies. So someone is asking, thanking you for sharing your journeys and saying you're an inspiration. What advice would you give to women who don't have female role models in senior positions in their organization? Maybe Helen, do you want to respond on that one?
Yeah, I can. So at different times in my career, I have and haven't had people I could really sort of look up to as those senior role models who were female. And I'll say what I've sort of learned over time is that I use an expression, micro role models. There are very few people I looked up to who have everything that you want to be, right? They're brilliant leaders, they're brilliant communicators, they're brilliant at people management. Very few people encompass all of those things. And I've found that finding what I call micro role models. So you see somebody in action who's a fantastic presenter and you go, how do I become a bit better at presenting like them? You find somebody who's that amazing leader who can walk a floor and talk to anybody, right? And just engage in a conversation, know the person and be really engaging. Okay, how can I be more like that person? So sometimes sometimes it's just, it's looking for those individual traits that you want to be more like in somebody, and then finding out if they'll help you be that person, right? And I'd say if you really want to look for sort of senior females, we are absolutely out here. They exist. There's an absolutely fantastic group of ladies on this call, but also there's many industry events that you can go to. There are women in tech events. We Are Tech Women is one, and there's a variety of things that happen, particularly in London. Go to those, find those inspiring people who can give you that confidence of, yes, it absolutely does happen. There are absolutely those people out there, and you can be the first one in your organization, right? You can be that first senior female role model yourself, right? And that's an important piece as well. So remember, when you do reach that level, you are a role model. People do look up to you, and you should be, I think it's Michelle Obama says, keeping the door open, right? So are you keeping the door open behind you to let others follow you through?
Thank you very much, Helen. I think I'll stay with you. We are done with the Q&As. Thank you for sharing your questions. We'll keep on looking at them, even if we don't respond to them today, because it's always helpful for us to think further. Maybe before we close that event, I would like our wonderful panel to leave us with some of their top tips. And maybe Helen, do you want to share with us, what you would like the audience to keep in mind following that panel from you?
Certainly. So the first thing, we talk about how can you navigate through challenging times. And my top tip is don't navigate alone. Build a support network. So, when I first returned from maternity leave, we built a working mothers network just to share challenges, to understand you weren't alone in going through some of this yourself. I almost reached burnout at one time in my career. I reached out to an external colleague who was able to show me there were alternatives, or if I was just brave enough to try them. And I even have somebody internally that if I'm frustrated of a particular day, I just message her on Teams, and we have a little sort of, oh, this is not going well. And we leave it with a smile, and the pressure's released, right? And that's what you need. You need the people who help you release the pressure so it doesn't build up and you can keep going.
Thank you so much. Super helpful. Lisa, what would be yours?
I think from my perspective, it's going back to something Anne said right at the start. It's about authenticity. It's about being authentic, being you, being honest. We're only human. We're all human. We all have our challenges. There's no point hiding them. Be honest about them. Have your trusted allies to talk to. Have your friends in the workplace that you feel you can talk to about this. And, that will hopefully help you navigate when you're feeling, vulnerable or challenged at any point in time. So just be authentic and true to yourself.
Thank you very much. And Bhavna, what would be what would make the biggest difference for you, and what do you want to leave to our audience?
To be honest, I think everybody said. I would just add one thing to it, is I think it becomes a lot easier to navigate through something if you're able to park the cause of something or the trigger of something in the right bucket. Knowing what is a systemic bucket, which is to turn around and say it's a policy or something that can't really change, or it's 500 years of patriarchy that you can't change. That needs to be dealt with differently, but it allows you to dissociate from any frustration you might be feeling with that. The second bucket I normally find is implicit bias, to know that everybody fundamentally wants to be kind and wants to be good and wants to do the right thing. But there is implicit bias at play, and that needs to be addressed separately. And the last and the most important one is to keep the internal narrative, which is dissuading to a bare minimum, right? Is to be absolutely agnostic in terms of, and clear in terms of what it is that you bring to the table, and then go after that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Bhavna. So thank you all. Thank you to our panel, and Bhavna, Helen, and Lisa. It's been a fascinating discussion. I heard a lot of things and words that are close to my heart: passion, authenticity, be surrounded, by people, rely on them to grow yourself and help them grow as well their career journey. So thank you for that. I hope you all found it as inspirational as me. That gave me further energy to carry on the day. We will have our next webcast in March, so keep an eye out on the day. on the date, sorry. And if you could wait, there will be a survey pop up after that call. We very much value feedback and would like to hear more about what you thought of that session. And we'll also, summarize some of what we've heard today on LinkedIn. So watch out for all that. Thank you again for attending. Thank you for contributing and for bringing all these tips and energy to that webcast. Much appreciated. I hope you all had a good time, and we'll speak again in March. Thank you.